You are standing in a courtyard filled with flowers that don't belong to you. The garlands are too heavy around your neck. The air smells of wine, crushed petals, and warm stone. Someone laughs behind you. Someone claps. Someone says your name like it's already part of history. You are getting married today. Your bride stands a few steps away, her veil thin enough that you can see the tremor in her hands. She hasn't looked at you in minutes. Not because she doesn't want to, because she's been taught not to draw attention to herself. Today is about ritual, not comfort. A priest raises his hands. The guests fall quiet. And then the sound changes. Boots on marble. Not ceremonial, not polite, heavy, confident. The sound of men who don't need permission. The courtyard freezes. You don't turn at first. You don't need to. Everyone already knows who has arrived. No announcement is made. None is required. The emperor walks in as if the wedding was arranged for him. He doesn't greet the priest. He doesn't acknowledge the vows. His eyes move slowly across the gathering, measuring, judging, lingering. When his gaze reaches your bride, it stops. Too long. He steps closer, lifts her veil with 2 fingers, tilts her chin upward like an object being inspected. He smiles not cruelly, casually, as if this is normal. You open your mouth, no sound comes out, because you understand something in that moment that Rome never teaches you outright. Marriage vows do not outrank imperial desire. Law does not outrank power, and today is not about love. It is about ownership. The emperor turns to his guards and nods once. They take her, not violently. That would be impolite. They escort her away while the guests remain perfectly still. Someone coughs. Someone looks at the ground. No one moves to stop it. You are left standing beside the altar, still holding a ring that now means nothing. The priest lowers his hands. The ceremony does not resume, and no one will ever call this a crime. If stories like this make you uncomfortable, they should. This is the historical archives, where we examine how power rewrote sacred moments into tools of domination. And by the end of this story, you'll understand why Roman weddings were never as protected as history pretends. Because this wasn't an exception. This was a pattern. To understand why that wedding could be interrupted without consequence, you need to unlearn a comforting lie. Rome did not see marriage the way we do. To modernize, a wedding is a private contract, 2 people, mutual consent, legal protection. To Rome, marriage was something colder, something political, something useful. A Roman marriage was not built to protect the bride. It was built to organize power. Every wedding tied families together. Every union moved property, influence, loyalty. Every bride represented a future lineage Rome could either reward or erase. That meant marriage was sacred. But it also meant marriage was exposed. Because in Rome, anything that mattered to the state ultimately belonged to the state, especially under the emperors. By the 1st century AD, Rome no longer pretended it was a republic. The Senate still met. Laws were still written. Priests still performed rituals. But everyone understood the quiet truth. The emperor was not just a ruler. He was the axis around which law, religion, and custom bent. Roman legal theory reflected this. The emperor embodied the state. His will carried the force of law. His presence redefined what was permissible simply by entering the room. That included weddings. There was no statute that said an emperor could seize a bride. There didn't need to be. Because Roman law was less about written limits and more about precedent. And precedent followed power. If an emperor desired something and no one punished him, that desire became a fact. If it happened again, it became custom. If custom went unchallenged long enough, it became invisible. This is where history often retreats into euphemism. Ancient sources describe these acts as indulgence, excess, or scandal. They reduce them to the personality of one mad emperor. But that framing misses the real danger, because this wasn't about uncontrollable appetite. This was about demonstration. When an emperor interrupted a wedding, he wasn't just taking a woman. He was sending a message to every man watching. Your household is not yours. Your vows are conditional. Your dignity survives only as long as I allow it to. That message mattered more than the act itself. It reached senators who believed their lineage protected them. It reached generals who believed their victories earned them respect. It reached priests who believed ritual restrained power. And every time no one intervened, the message grew louder. By the end of this story, you're going to see that these interruptions weren't spontaneous. They followed patterns. They targeted specific families. They escalated during moments of political tension. Most importantly, you'll see how Rome responded, not by stopping it, but by normalizing it, recording it carefully, and punishing anyone who refused to pretend it was acceptable. This wasn't chaos breaking the system. This was the system working exactly as designed. And now that you understand that, we can finally look at how it functioned behind the scenes. Because the wedding was only the stage, the machinery that made it possible was already in place. Rome liked to believe it ruled the world through law. That belief was carefully cultivated. Marble courthouses, public trials, written codes etched into stone. To an outsider, Rome looked restrained, procedural, civilized. But Roman law was not designed to limit power. It was designed to channel it. At the center of that system stood one principle, so absolute it quietly overrode everything else. The emperor was the living embodiment of the state. His body carried legal authority. His presence transformed spaces. His desires were not private impulses. They were political events. This was not metaphorical. Roman jurists wrote it plainly. What pleased the emperor had the force of law. That single idea is what made weddings vulnerable. Marriage in Rome was not a sacrament protected by inviolable consent. It was a legal arrangement between families, sanctioned by custom, not enforced by force. A bride passed from the authority of her father to the authority of her husband. Her consent mattered socially, sometimes emotionally, but legally it was secondary to male guardianship, which meant the protection around her was only as strong as the men who claimed her, and those men were never more exposed than on their wedding day. A Roman wedding was a public display. Families gathered. Alliances were visible. Promises were announced. It was a moment designed to showcase status, fertility, continuity. That visibility was the point. And visibility is exactly what power exploits. An emperor interrupting a wedding didn't need guards or warrants. His presence alone collapsed resistance. To object would be to imply that imperial authority stopped at the edge of your household. That suggestion bordered on treason. So no one objected. Honor did the rest of the work. Roman masculinity was built on control. A man's reputation depended on his ability to govern his household, protect his lineage, and present stability to the public. To lose a wife publicly was not just a personal violation. It was a social annihilation. That humiliation trapped men in silence. If you protested, you admitted weakness. If you resisted, you endangered your family. If you spoke afterward, you exposed yourself to ridicule, suspicion, or worse. The system didn't need to threaten everyone explicitly. It relied on something far more efficient. Shared understanding. Everyone knew the rules had changed. No announcement was made. No reform passed. But behavior shifted. Invitations became careful. Brides were kept out of sight. Some families delayed marriages. Others rushed them, hoping speed offered protection. It didn't. And here's the part history often avoids saying out loud. These acts were recorded, not in the language of crime, in the language of administration. Elite households kept quiet notes. Priests logged ceremonies interrupted. Courtiers remembered which families fell out of favor afterward. Whispers moved through Rome faster than law ever could. This wasn't disorder. It was adaptation. The system adjusted to accommodate abuse without naming it as such. By framing these violations as indulgences, as eccentricities of a single ruler, Rome protected the illusion that its institutions still functioned. The law hadn't failed. It had simply been flexible. And flexibility always favors power. This is why the wedding mattered so much, because it was one of the few moments where private life became visible enough to be claimed. When an emperor took a bride, he wasn't just violating a woman. He was erasing a boundary Rome pretended still existed, and Rome let him. Now that you understand the machinery, we need to step back inside it. Not as an emperor, not as a senator, but as a woman whose wedding never resumed. Because systems don't feel abstract to the people they consume. They feel personal. Her name is Livia. Not the famous one historians argue about. Not a woman whose marble bust survived. Just Livia. One of many. She is 17 years old, and this morning she was a daughter. By midday she is supposed to be a wife. Her mother braided her hair before dawn, fingers shaking just enough to give it away. Not fear of the marriage. Fear of visibility. Roman women learned early that attention was never neutral. Being seen meant being evaluated. Livia was careful. She always had been. She learned when to lower her eyes, when to smile, when to say nothing at all. These were not signs of weakness. They were survival skills passed quietly from mother to daughter, never written down, never acknowledged. The wedding procession moves through the streets toward the courtyard. Musicians play. Neighbors watch. Someone throws flowers, someone makes a joke about children. The future is being narrated aloud, as if saying it firmly enough will make it real. Livia does not look for the emperor. She has been taught not to imagine danger before it arrives. To do so would be rude, unfeminine, unnecessary. When the boots echo across the stone, she feels it before she understands it. The sound is wrong. Her husband stiffens beside her. She sees it in the way his shoulders lock, the way his breath stops just a fraction too late. She wants to look at him, to ask what's happening, but her training overrides instinct. She keeps her eyes lowered. A shadow falls across the courtyard. The veil is lifted. The air changes. The emperor does not ask her name. He does not need to. He asks where she is from, who her father is, how old she is. Each question is casual, almost polite. But Livia feels the weight behind them. These are not curiosities. They are inventory checks. When the guards step forward, her first thought is not fear, it is confusion. This is not how stories go. Weddings are protected moments, even in Rome. Especially in Rome. She has heard the stories of gods offended when vows are broken, of omens, of curses. The rituals exist to prevent exactly this. Someone will stop it. Someone always does. No one does. She is led away through corridors she has never seen, past rooms she was never meant to enter. The sounds of the wedding fade behind her. Music continues for a few seconds longer than it should. Then it stops. Inside the palace, time loosens its grip. Servants avoid her eyes. That is how she knows this is not new. People don't avoid novelty. They avoid familiarity they don't want to acknowledge. She is given water, new clothing, instructions delivered softly, as if kindness might disguise the absence of choice. No one explains how long she will be there. No one explains what happens next. When she is returned hours later, the courtyard is empty. The garlands have been cleared. The altar dismantled. Her husband is gone, not taken, removed. By the next morning, the story has already shifted. People say the marriage was postponed, that there was an honor bestowed, that the emperor showed favor. Language rearranges itself quickly when survival depends on it. Livia does not correct anyone. She learns something essential in the days that follow. Her silence is being monitored. Her reputation is being weighed. What she says next will determine not what happened, but how it is remembered. When she is eventually married again, it is quieter, faster, no procession. No music. Her new husband does not ask questions. He understands the cost of curiosity. Livia survives. That is what the records would say, if they said anything at all. But survival comes with a condition. She must never name what was taken from her. She must never frame it as violation. Only as interruption. Only as delay. Only as something that happened because it could. Her wedding is remembered as an anomaly. She is remembered as compliant. And the system moves on. But Livia is only one version of this story, because when power perfects a method, it refines it. And the next women were chosen more carefully. Not every bride was taken the same way. Once the pattern proved effective, it evolved. Families who mattered learned faster than others. Senators, generals, old names carved into stone. They understood that what happened at weddings was no longer random indulgence. It was selection, so they adjusted. Ceremonies became smaller. Invitations were limited. Brides were hidden behind thicker veils, escorted through side streets, married at dawn or after dark. Some families delayed marriages for years, hoping time would outlast danger. It didn't. Because the refined version of power doesn't wait to be seen. Her name was Titilia. Her family had standing. Not royal, but close enough to be useful. Her father sat in the Senate. Her uncles commanded legions. Their loyalty had never been questioned. That was precisely why they were vulnerable. Statilia's wedding was held indoors. No procession, no crowd, just witnesses carefully chosen and carefully silent. Everyone present understood the performance they were participating in. This was not celebration. This was risk management. The emperor arrived anyway. This time, there was no shock, no confusion, no break in ritual. The interruption was seamless, almost practiced. Statilia was not taken immediately. That was the difference. Instead, the emperor stayed. He watched the ceremony. He commented on the vows. He joked with the guests. He allowed the marriage to be completed. Relief spread through the room too quickly. That was the mistake. Later that night, after the guests had left and the house had gone quiet, the summons arrived. Courteous, formal, impossible to refuse. Statilia was escorted to the palace, not as a captive, but as a guest. That distinction mattered, because what followed was not public humiliation. It was something more durable. Inside the palace, she was treated with care. compliments, conversation, questions about her family's history, about politics, about loyalty. The violation was implied, not declared, wrapped in language that allowed everyone involved to pretend nothing irreversible was happening. This version of the system didn't need witnesses. It needed complicity. Statilia returned home before dawn. Her husband did not ask where she had been. He did not need to. By asking, he would have turned private knowledge into public danger. From that night on, the marriage existed in a different state, intact in form, compromised in meaning. The emperor had achieved something far more valuable than access. He had leverage. Statilia's family began receiving favors, appointments, contracts, invitations, then warnings, delays, investigations narrowly avoided. Every benefit carried an unspoken reminder. Gratitude was expected. Silence was mandatory. This was humiliation without spectacle. A man whose wife had been taken publicly could still imagine revenge. A man whose wife had been honored privately could not, because there was no crime to name, only implication, only memory. Statilia lived the rest of her life carefully. She learned how to smile without inviting interest, how to speak without revealing position, how to protect her children from being too visible. Her family survived. That survival was not free. It required loyalty that could never be withdrawn. It required pretending that protection came from proximity to power, not distance from it. And this is how the system perfected itself. Public violations taught fear. Private violations taught obedience. By the time later emperors inherited these methods, the lesson had already been absorbed. You did not need to interrupt every wedding. You only needed to do it once. After that, reputation did the work for you. Rome adjusted again. And this time, the adjustment lasted. What happened at those weddings did not stay at those weddings. It couldn't. Because once a society accepts that its most sacred moments can be overridden without consequence, the damage spreads outward quietly, efficiently, and permanently. In the years that followed, Roman marriage changed. Not by law, by behavior. Families began treating weddings less as celebrations and more as liabilities. Public processions shrank. Invitations tightened. Rituals were rushed or relocated indoors. Some unions were postponed indefinitely. Others were arranged with brutal speed, hoping that obscurity offered safety. It didn't. What changed most wasn't ceremony. It was trust. Men learned that their status did not shield them. Women learned that protection was conditional. Priests learned that ritual only mattered when power allowed it to matter. And once that understanding settled in, Rome did what it always did best. It normalized. The interruptions were no longer discussed openly. They became rumors, then assumptions, then things people planned around. A wedding that went uninterrupted wasn't proof of safety. It was proof of luck. This had a chilling secondary effect. Victims disappeared from the historical record not because they were unimportant, but because remembering them threatened the system that continued to benefit from silence. Roman historians were elite men, senators, courtiers, priests. The same class that had learned to survive by not naming what happened in their own households. So they wrote carefully. They framed these acts as excess, as scandal, as the eccentricities of individual rulers. They reduced systemic abuse to personality flaws because personality flaws can die with the person. Systems cannot. By isolating blame, Rome protected its institutions. Marriage could remain honorable. Law could remain intact. Religion could remain sacred. The cost was borne by women whose names were never recorded, and men whose silence became part of their legacy. This pattern should feel familiar, because it didn't end with Rome. Across history, powerful institutions have used the same mechanics. Public humiliation to establish dominance, private violation to enforce loyalty, administrative language to erase responsibility, and silence carefully rewarded to ensure survival. The vocabulary changes, the architecture does not. Modern societies still struggle with the same reflex. When violations threaten reputations, systems close ranks. They isolate cases, they question victims, they reframe harm as misunderstanding, misbehavior, or anomaly. And just like Rome, they rely on forgetting. Not dramatic forgetting, bureaucratic forgetting. Missing files, softened language. Careers that continue uninterrupted. Rome mastered this early. By the time later emperors ruled, the lesson was clear. You didn't need to seize brides to prove power. You only needed to remind people that you could. Fear, once learned, does not need rehearsal. And so these stories faded. Not because they were rare, but because they were effective. What survived were fragments, a line in a chronicle, a vague accusation. a moralizing aside, enough to hint, never enough to indict the system itself. That erasure is part of the violence, because when memory is lost, patterns repeat without resistance. Which is why telling these stories now matters, not to sensationalize, not to retroactively moralize, but to restore what power tried to dissolve into silence. History likes clean endings. Tyrants fall, laws return, order is restored. Rome tells itself this story again and again. But for the women whose weddings were interrupted, there was no restoration, no reckoning, no public acknowledgement that what happened to them mattered. Livia's name, if it was ever written down, survives only as a footnote, if at all. Statilia's life continues in careful obscurity, remembered for her family's stability rather than the cost of achieving it. The system didn't collapse because of them. It endured because of them, because endurance required silence, and silence was rewarded. This is the hardest truth to accept when studying power. Most systems don't survive by crushing everyone openly. They survive by teaching people how to adapt, how to look away, how to narrate their own erasure as necessity. Rome didn't lose its brides because it was cruel. It lost them because cruelty worked, and once it worked, it didn't need to be repeated loudly. Empires fall eventually. Rome did, but the logic that allowed these violations did not die with it. It reappears wherever sacred language is used to shield authority, where reputation outweighs harm, where victims are asked to be quiet for the sake of stability. That is why remembering matters, not as spectacle, not as outrage, but as resistance. Every time a story like this is told clearly, without euphemism, without deflection, it interrupts the pattern. It refuses the lie that these were isolated acts, or that the past was simply different. If you believe that history should remember the people it consumed, not just the institutions that consumed them, then this is what the historical archives exist to do. We don't tell these stories to reopen wounds. We tell them because forgetting is how systems win twice. If preserving erased voices matters to you, subscribe to the historical archives. Because memory is one of the few forces power has never fully controlled, and as long as these stories are told, the silence never fully closes.